Hi, y'all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani,
And I'm Sam.
and this time we are going across the country. I know, I'm actually getting away from the West Coast for once.
Okay.
Okay,
It's so fun over here on the West Coast, though.
we just have a lot of killers.
Bunch of devious minds over here.
I
Depressed people.
depressed people. It's
Yeah,
horrible.
it's pretty bad.
I know. I have a couple coming up that are out here that it's going to be
Yeah.
challenging for you.
Although the East Coast people can be a little unhinged.
Yeah,
Too much stress.
anywhere can.
I know. I
Anywhere
know.
can.
I like just putting stereotypes on all the locations in the
Let's
world.
just do it all.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Martha Elizabeth Moxley was born on August 30th, 1960 she grew up for the most part in Piedmont, California. Yes, I know I said the other coast. Just give me a second.
Okay.
With her parents, Dorothy, as well as an older brother, John, who was 4 years her senior. The Moxley family moved to town in 1974 to Bellhaven, a gated community in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh,
See?
I'm very familiar with Greenwich, Connecticut.
Yeah. According to All That's Interesting, quote, moving across the country did not faze the teenager. Voted best personality in middle school, she easily made new friends. A straight A student and basketball player, Moxley seemed to have everything going for her, end quote.
All right.
And they moved into a very well-to-do
I
neighborhood.
was going to say Greenwich is, if at least 10 years ago, was one of the most affluent country or towns in America.
hmm And they were in I'm talking gated community with a guard shack that you
Yeah.
had to get into.
The boy I was a nanny for, his dad lived in Greenwich. So I was there frequently,
Yeah.
dropping him off in our little Audi that we had at the time. Um, and that house was insane.
I believe it.
It was insane. And the inside was impeccable. It was just amazing.
hmm So let's go to October 31st, 1975. 15-year-old Martha Moxley did not come home after going out with friends. By morning, Dorothy was calling everyone. A search started, and one of Sheila's friends found Martha bludgeoned to death with a golf club.
Oh no. Oh, that's fitting for the area, I feel like.
She was found just outside of her own home.
Oh,
A blanket laid over her. The only forensic evidence found at the time were two hairs, one from an African American and one from an Asian, but both were lost prior to DNA being available for testing with modern forensics, according to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or have not been tested according to other sources.
wait. Robert F.
We'll get
Kennedy.
into it.
Okay.
Slow your roll.
I love that he is involved in this case. He's so relevant these
Yeah.
days.
Other than blood pools, 3 pieces of a golf club were left at the scene. A fourth piece, the handle, was notably missing. Investigators believe she was killed between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. the night before. Matt Steiner, a crime scene reconstructionist, recreated the crime scene with a soccer field decades later. It showed that in the driveway of the Moxley home, droplets of blood were found about 40 feet away from a pool of blood. Was Martha suggesting she was there at one period and then 40 feet away for another period. So she had moved around, but then was stagnant, likely during being beaten with this
Right.
golf club. And in that second area, next to one of the sections, so there was one of the golf club shafts. Again,
Okay.
it was 3 pieces.
Right.
Then on the other side of the driveway, about 25 feet away, was another section of the golf club. And finally, further down the road was the club head.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They destroyed that club.
And it was a Tony Pena Lady 6-iron, matching a monogram set in the Skakel home, was what was recovered at the scene. However, the handle, again, never recovered. They never found it. From the site of the club head, she was dragged towards the wood line where she was found next to a large pine tree.
Okay.
So, they had the driveway and kind of an open area and then trees.
Yeah.
And so she was drug into where the tree line would have been, so she wasn't laying in the
She wasn't
more
just, like,
open
right
area.
there. Yeah.
As a club head came from the Skakel home, father rushed and allowed it to be searched. Michael's one of the boys mm, that lived in the home. His pair of pants and shoes were found in the garbage of the Skakel house that night, and Martha's hair was also found with them. We'll get into all of this in a little
Okay.
bit. Don't worry, I know where your head's going.
I know.
Dr. Henry Lee, a medical examiner, reviewed the autopsy report, and based on the type and severity of wounds, Dr. Lee reports it to be a frenzy style killing. Imprints of the inner side of the club were found on the left side of her chin. So, I mean, yeah. And once the golf club head was broken off, the killer actually stabbed her from the left to the right through the neck, which ultimately killed her.
With the golf club?
Yeah. So the head had like broken
Right.
off of it, and yeah, they used
Left,
it.
like, a sharp shaft, and
hmm
they oh
yeah.
my gosh.
On November 4th, 1975, about 500 people gathered for her funeral.
Oh, wow. I
On
mean, she was like a athlete,
yeah,
and yeah.
on January 22nd, 1976, Rushton Skakel ended his family's cooperation with investigators. So, what happened that night? According to Mother Dorothy, Martha had stayed out late the weekend before and was originally grounded, but Dorothy decided to let her go out on the 30th. When she failed to make curfew, Dorothy started making calls, and one friend stated she was out with 17-year-old Tommy and 15-year-old Michael Skakel, their neighbors. The Skakel boys were nephews of Robert F. Kennedy's widow, Ethel Kennedy.
Oh my gosh.
So that just put it in the news more. Um, let's just put it out there now because of that notoriety affects things later on.
Oh, for sure.
So we'll see it. Anyway, Martha, along with friends Helen Hicks and Jeffrey Burns, went to the Skakel home at approximately 8:45 p.m. They listened to music in the car in the driveway, actually, instead of like in the house. And Martha is known to be like with the Skakel boys, and she's like sitting in between them in the back of the car. Around 9:30, two other Skakel brothers, John and Rushton Jr., decide to leave and go to their cousins, and Martha is invited but by Michael but declines, and four of the boys head out and Martha goes home.
Okay.
When the investigation begins, they immediately, obviously, go to the Skakel home, and Tommy and Michael give their statements in which it is determined that as Martha headed for home, Tommy goes inside to work on a paper, though when they do an investigation, there was no paper due.
Oh, no.
Um,
Oh,
I know there's always these little like flaws, but also these are kids, so they're probably nervous and they're just like, I don't know, like, how do I prove
right.
like I wasn't
They're not trained murderers who have a beautiful backstory.
hmm They're probably nervous younger boys.
Right.
I mean, they are younger boys, but they're probably nervous. Then at 10 p.m., watches TV with their brand new live-in tutor, 23-year-old Ken Littleton.
Oh, that speaks to the community.
Yeah, who had moved in that morning, actually.
Oh my
Um,
God.
mhm. Ken was inside the house until 9:45 when the housekeeper asked him to check the perimeter of the house. He did, making it back to the house around 10 p.m. and corroborated watching TV with Tommy, but that he said it happened closer to like 10:25. So
Wait.
the
s- So that groundskeeper or who
live-in tutor
the live-in tutor was asked to check the
by a
perimeter
housekeeper.
by the house. What a weird request.
I know. They don't say why, and like it's not like, can you just make sure the doors are locked because the kids were, out drinking and or were drinking or like there's no like maybe there's an actual reason why, but there's nothing that ever says
Interesting. I
why.
mean, rich people are weird.
Yeah,
Uh,
suspicious.
well, they just also they have people who work for them, and they ask those people to do strange things occasionally. But that's a unique request. I
Yeah.
I already like sort of can relate to this Kenny. I'm going to call him Kenny. Kenneth?
Ken,
Ken? I'm just making up his name right now.
Yeah, Kenny.
Um, because I also worked for a family that basically lived in Greenwich, I feel like. So,
All right. Later during other talks, Tommy changes his story, stating that night he actually went back out around 9:30 to be alone with Martha, and they engaged in a sexual act before coming inside. And
ooh,
they don't get specific with it,
okay.
but again, these are teenagers, so
Right.
we don't need to get specific.
Right.
Could have just been making out on the lawn. I
Right.
don't know. Between 11 and 11:30, Michael returns home from his car ride with John and Rushton Jr. and goes to bed. The alibis are vetted by the investigators and they move on pretty quickly. Next, investigators look at Ken Littleton, who again had just started working that
Right.
morning at the Skakels. When he was interrogated, his story did change a few times, and he was considered to have potential opportunity and access. However, Tommy reported being with him at the time Martha was most likely being murdered.
What a nightmare.
hmm Years later, during a look back at the case, Pat Brown, a criminal profiler, speaks about Ken Littleton, saying he displays similar traits to other known psychopaths.
Oh
In
no.
addition, he did fail a polygraph during the investigation. But even with that, we both know I don't trust polygraphs, so calm down.
Maybe I don't identify with Ken so much.
Yeah, yeah, maybe not. You definitely don't.
But at the same time, I do have to say, we like he probably interviewed for this tutor job,
hmm
probably lied.
hmm
A lot of people lie when they're getting interviewed to get the jobs that they want,
Yeah,
right? And now the first day you start, you have the police asking you questions about who you are, what you're doing there.
yeah,
And you're like, okay, I have my boss who just gave me a place to live and I'm staying with them and I've left everything behind depending on where he's from. And now I have to tell them the truth that maybe I'm not good at math or
yeah,
like, I'm actually not. I didn't go to MIT the way I just told my bosses that I did.
yeah.
Whatever it is, which would be pretty embarrassing.
That would be. Um, so again, I've talked about why I don't trust polygraphs before. I took a polygraph in order to get a job in Washington, and my baseline questions couldn't even be established. I was told I showed deception with my name, which can be verified on my birth certificate and by any members of my family. So from that point on, there's no way to determine a truth or a lie. So if you can't have your baseline questions established, and that could just be like nervousness or like part of it, they were like, oh, you could hear somebody else's conversation. So it affected the way your brain was working. So if you can't establish baseline, you're not like nothing else is conclusive
Right.
on this. So
Right.
if that happened to him, like we don't, he's probably under duress, like you said. Now he's got all these things and he's like, oh shit, like what do I do? Like you're gonna fail the polygraph.
Yeah.
I don't care. So Ken was considered one of the top suspects for a long time, but there was burden of proof, and at the time there was none. Throughout the investigation, over 200 people were questioned, but nothing came of it.
200 people. I mean, I guess,
I mean, they went big for this, so
yeah.
they wanted to make sure that they were getting it down, I
Yeah.
guess. So,
I mean, when it's rich people like paying the taxes of the police force and they get to have all the cool toys and all the fun things, you got to make sure that you're like delivering on the promises that you're making.
yeah, that's fair. In April 1976, Ken was not welcome in the Skakel home after police on Nantucket Island arrested him for burglary and cocaine use.
Oh, Ken. Man, I regret ever saying I identify with this
No, I
man.
like it. This is funny.
Oh, God.
Uh,
I mean, there's a little bit, I guess. I've never burglarized a place before, but I
yeah.
can relate on other things, I guess, maybe.
Oh, shit. Ken's ex-wife, Mary, who was married to him from 1983 to 1990, said that she met him in Florida and the two married quickly. She knew nothing of what had happened in Connecticut, only that he left after an alcohol-related issue. After getting married, the couple moved to Ottawa. She maintains that she didn't know anything of the murder of Martha until after the couple divorced, and Ken's drinking began to ramp up, and he became more and more unstable. Eventually, the drinking led to a complete psychotic break, at which time he called and threatened to kill her.
Oh, gosh.
hmm John Moxley went to see Ken in Boston. He wanted to know about the murder, to know why he couldn't clear his name, but after a long conversation with him, he just believes that Ken got caught up in the mess of the investigation and it just took a toll on him.
I believe that.
hmm
I do. I definitely believe that. I trust my little side story that he lied to get the job that he got, and then the day the police come knocking on his door the day after he starts, he goes, "Oh shit.
Yeah.
Uh,
This is not
everyone's
good.
gonna find out. I am lying to all
Yeah,
of these people."
potentially. In 1990, so nothing happens. For many, many years, we fast forward all the way to
Yeah.
1990. Forensics is now better posed to determine the killer, yet still nothing was found at this time until Dominic Dunn, a reporter, received a leaked report from the Sutton Associates, which is a private firm, who wrote a report on how exposed the two Skakel boys were. So they literally were hired by Rushton, the father,
Mhm.
and was like, well, based on the information given by the boys and like the investigation, how does it make them look? And I really feel like this was like a rich person play, but it backfired exponentially on
Oh,
them.
no.
It showed that both boys lied during the police investigation. Like, so they flat out said that they were false
Right.
in their statements. Dunn tells Mark Furman, former LAPD homicide detective, to look at the report. Oh, so now it's going to police, or like former police to look it over.
Which was this just I mean, I obviously it was a cold case in the
Mhm.
sense like it had been years. But was it just sort of like sitting there and then this family like dredged it up? Like,
Um, I don't know why the reporter, like why it got leaked to him. They had some like weird explanation of other things that the reporter was into. And then they were like, oh, well, if you saw this, look at this kind of a
right,
situation. But I didn't write that down and like, because it didn't play into this investigation specifically. But yeah, that was kind of the reason is like, A led to B, and
right.
that's kind of how it led to him so many years later.
Interesting.
hmm Tommy had reported some sort of sexual contact with Martha, in which, again, it sounds like they really just made out. Michael said that later in the night he went to Martha's home and threw rocks at her window. And when she didn't come out, he masturbated right there in the trees outside her window before
Oh,
going
these
home.
boys were like wrapped up into Martha, man.
Yeah, there are like other reports that they think that Michael was jealous because Martha would always like kind of poo-poo his advances, even though they were closer in age, and would kind of lean towards Tommy. Even, he's a few
Right,
years older, and it
right.
kind of irritated Michael. But there's just, that feels like high school drama where they're like, oh, he definitely was mad because he,
She was into his older brother.
yeah,
Like,
without having, I don't know, burden of proof.
yeah.
Though there is a little bit, we'll get into it pretty soon. So back in 1978, Michael was arrested for a DUI, and instead of going to jail because he's rich, he went to a rehab facility in
Oh.
Enola.
Is that what the newspapers reported? Because he's rich.
Oh, I'm saying that. I'm saying I would have gone to jail.
Yeah. I mean, 1978 was a little bit of a different time, but still, I think the money probably was helpful. The connections to the Kennedys had probably definitely a lot of pull in the 70s.
hmm There, he talked with many others, including George Coleman, an addict who reported that Michael admitted to beating Martha to death with a golf club. He alleged Michael confessed to him, saying, quote, I'm going to get away with murder. I'm a Kennedy, end quote.
Exactly. Could write this myself.
He informed police of this. Later, however, he recants his statement, stating he heard the confession while on heroin.
Oh, God.
Still, things take time to move, and it isn't until a special grand jury was appointed to investigate Martha's death in 1998 that a ball finally actually started rolling.
So my understanding though too is that like if you're a prosecutor, you're not going to ask for a grand jury unless you've got something,
Mhm.
right? Like they had to have at that point. They knew something something came to light at that point.
Yeah.
But probably not enough because then that's also why you ask for a grand jury instead of just going to trial. It's
Yeah.
because you want to see if a grand jury thinks that you
Well,
could prosecute.
so, grand juries have to indict you before you can be prosecuted or
Always,
before you can go to trial.
always.
I do believe it is.
I definitely do not. I am not the
Yeah.
expert on this, but I thought that
You could go to trial without it.
potentially you could go to trial without it if you had the burden of proof. You could bring it to a judge and say, we can prosecute on this. And a judge could say, yeah, you've got the evidence. It's a slam dunk. Like, this can go to trial. I was pretty sure grand jury was more along the lines of like,
Circumstantial.
yeah, we're requesting a grand jury to determine if we have enough evidence to go to trial.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be it.
But
That that
whether or
sounds
not
right.
you need to have a grand jury
Yeah.
like it's potentially that like maybe you do just go to the grand jury every time. But was fairly certain that you can request a grand jury trial
Mhm.
if you don't have enough to bring it to like the actual state,
Mhm.
but you think you have enough to convince a jury. You can like go to grand jury and they get to decide if you get to indict someone or not.
Potentially.
I mean, I do watch a lot of Law and Crime.
I do too, but I have also been looking at cases in other countries, and now I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
remember. Like, I can't,
We'll
I
come
can't
back.
keep,
We'll set the record straight the next time we record.
I cannot keep things
Yeah,
straight in my own mind sometimes. Which is why I write everything down that I'm going to talk about.
that's fair.
Because otherwise I'd be
That's
like,
fair.
what was I going to say again? I knew this 2 minutes
Yeah.
ago. So in 2000, when Michael Skakel was arrested for, it was in 2000 when he was arrested for Martha's murder. The trial began in 2002. Prosecution presented the argument that Michael was angry at Martha because she didn't want anything to do with him, that his sexual advances were shot down, instead preferring Tommy, according to her own diary.
Oh.
Per her entries, starting a month prior to her murder, quote, when driving in Tom's car, and I was practically sitting on Tom's lap, he kept putting his hand on my knee, end quote.
Oh my God.
A couple other quotes that she has from there. Quote, he kept doing stuff like that. Jesus, if Peter ever found out, I would be dead. I think Jackie really likes Michael, and I think maybe he likes her. Maybe because he was drunk, but I don't know, end
Oh
quote.
my
And
gosh.
October 4th, 1975, she wrote, quote, I went to a party. Tom S. was being an ass at the dance. He kept putting his arm around me and making moves, end quote. Um, so it just sounds like teenage stuff. But I will also mention that there are articles that say that um, I don't there was, like, the mother's not in the Rushton home. I don't remember if she died or just they divorced and he had the kids, but I don't think she was there, and he was, working quite a bit, so that home ended up the Skakel home ended up kind of as, like, the party place
Yeah,
where the kids could go and drink, and there weren't repercussions for it. Um Offshoot, sorry.
that's fine.
Another diary thing said, quote, Michael was totally out of it, that he was being a real asshole in his actions and words. He kept telling me that I was leading Tom on when I don't like him, except as a friend. I said, well, how about you and Jackie? You kept telling me that you don't like her and you're all over her. He doesn't understand that he can be nice to her without hanging all over her. Michael jumps to conclusions. I can't be friends with Tom just because I talk to him. It doesn't mean I like him. I really have to stop going over there. End quote.
Did you have a diary as a teenager?
Not as a teenager. I think I quit when I was probably elementary or maybe middle school. But
Oh my
I
gosh.
feel like once I actually hit the full teenage age, I was done with it.
Oh, I kept one. I think I got even more entrenched the older I got, up until like college years. I am reminded right now that I've had friends in every place that I live that I show where my diaries still are because I still have them all. If I die, you are to find them and burn them
Burn
all.
them. Yeah. I can't imagine the things I would have written in those. That would have been horrible.
Oh my
Too
God.
much evidence.
I
No, thank
mean,
you.
I have like the very first one I ever had, like in fourth grade. And it is just riddled with my crushes on my classmates Ben and my neighbor Derek.
Oh
If
my
you ever
God.
listen to this, there you go. When I was in fourth grade, I was obsessed with you two. Um, but then they like evolve and they are like, man, yeah, they need to be burned.
Yeah, I believe that. No, I guess, confessions or diaries would have gone to actual letters to my uncle. I used to write to him when he was in prison, from the time I was young, like young elementary school, because I remember I sent him once a penny that was like color changed. I sent him because I had one and they had done an experiment in school
Uh-huh.
and it changed it. And so I sent it to him, not realizing that in a prison
They're gonna
you can't
take
get
it.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very, so I mean, I think I was like first, second grade ish
Yeah.
when I started. So I don't really need a diary. I literally told that man everything.
He was your priest.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not
No, that's not the word we want to
your
use.
confessional.
Yeah, he was just that guy.
Yeah.
Right? Because I didn't meet him until he got out. So I didn't, well, he got out once in between. So I met him in like third, fourth grade, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but only one time. We were good pen pals. I was a
That's
good pen pal.
yeah, I'm sure
See,
you
that was
were.
my diary. Like I
Yeah.
didn't, so then I didn't, it'd be duplicate work, right? I
Oh,
write to
for
him and
sure.
then I have to write it in the
Oh,
diary too.
I want to be written twice. No way. No way.
See, so all my stuff has long been lost to
Yeah.
time,
Okay.
which is a very good thing. Uh, so back to the trial. On June 7th, 2002, 25 years after Martha's murder, Michael Skakel was found guilty of her murder, receiving a sentence of 20 to life. Immediately, appeals begin and a new legal team is brought in. They attempt to get Michael's case overturned. It's also later determined that a PI was hired by the Skakel family and they obtained information never brought to trial. On August 23rd, 2003, Tony Bryant comes forward in a confession tape produced by PI Chris Steele. Tony went to school in the area and he brings two friends with him, Adolf Hasbrook and Bert Tinsley, like to the neighborhood that night.
Mm-hmm.
Adolf had a crush on Martha and basically said he was going to take her, I guess.
Ew.
Tony was carrying one of the golf clubs from the Skakel home. He said that everyone in the neighborhood would use them as they sat on the back porch because they were just sitting out.
Right.
They would borrow them to chip balls, and that night Adolf and Bert took off with a golf club, talking about how they wanted to, quote, go caveman, end quote, that they
Ew.
wanted to take a woman and do what they wanted to her, essentially.
That's so gross. Yeah.
People are gross. Tony left the group and didn't see them until days later, at which point they stated they were successful. And he reported that he didn't come forward years prior because he didn't want to be rolled in as a suspect. That his mom even told him not to come forward because he would likely be blamed for the murder, but nobody has ever come forward saying that the trio were in the neighborhood that night.
Mm. So his mom is alive then.
No, this is a friend.
Oh, okay.
This is not one of the Skakels.
Okay.
Tony, not Tommy.
Tony, not Tommy.
And that there were extra police in the area and the community again was gated, meaning you had to check in prior to getting
Right.
into it. The guard said that nobody matching those descriptions entered that night.
So the golf club was a female golf club. Was it owned by the Skakel boys?
I It was in their
Their
like
collection? Okay.
yeah, but it sounds like they were just always sitting out and
Right. They were
so anybody come
they would
over would just
hit beer cans with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
mess around with them.
Yeah.
Um, Vito Colucci, another PI, went to see Adolf Hasbrook. Vito stated that Adolf's story changed every time he and Chris Steele asked him questions, particularly when attempting to get information specifically about timelines and the death of Martha. 11 years later, an appeal goes through that Michael had ineffective counsel.
Oh, God.
So nothing comes of the Adolf Vito situation. They do point to, again, this came back. So in the very beginning, we talked about the like African American and Asian hairs,
Right.
which would match these two boys.
Right.
But because they were lost before DNA evidence could be identified based on the times. But it was just funny because the Kennedy actually like kind of pushed that narrative, and I'm like, I feel like you're pushing it because it leans like it gives some credence to these two potentially being the ones
Right.
that did it.
It creates a alternate theory.
Mm-hmm. But nobody else in the neighborhood, they're all like, no, they couldn't have been there. Nobody saw them.
Also, I have questions regarding how would you have known that it was an African American hair and an Asian hair before DNA testing?
I have no idea, but that's what it said
And
in many
then,
places.
right. And so then like in police reports or
Just
in,
in the sources that I can find online.
so I wonder if there's even a legitimate record of it in a police evidence collection, or if it was just a narrative that was able to be leaked to
Yeah,
whatever source would pick it up as a story, and then it became actually part of this case
yeah,
when in all reality it is not even factual.
yeah. I have no idea which one.
Because they could have had like a dog that had similar hair,
Yeah,
like
back in the
who knows? But
yeah, that's fair.
and those Kennedys, man. I mean, Bobby Kennedy Jr., he was a lawyer. He is a
Hmm.
lawyer, I should say. So a lot, I mean, I think a lot of the Kennedys are lawyers. And so they just are going to have,
Yeah,
they're going to have the best of the best.
of course they are. Not doctors. They are lawyers.
Yeah,
Like every family has the
right.
family of doctors. They got a family of
Right.
lawyers. That's frightening. Um, the Kennedys do say though that they're like the Skakels and the Kennedys weren't really that close, and that they actually were on different political sides. So they were never like they were like, I mean, like we knew of them, but we didn't really
Yeah,
do
that's
anything with
what you
them.
would say. You would definitely distance yourself from the family who has two murdering boys in it.
Do not get conspiracy theorist on me,
I mean, it's
please.
not a conspiracy. It's so right. They're they're politicians. Everything's a
Listen,
conspiracy in politics.
before we get sued, we don't actually know. Thank you.
You're right. And I love the Kennedys.
So, yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I love the Kennedys. Bobby Jr. is a unique individual,
Yeah.
who I will leave it at that. But
Yeah.
Bobby Sr. was an incredible man.
Mm. All right. So, back to the ineffective counsel now. So they said part of the ineffective counsel was that the defense hadn't brought up the idea that Tommy, Michael's brother, could have been a possible culprit, that the Elon school confessions, there was other teen young adults with addiction issues, and that Michael hadn't had any known interactions with them, so it was likely just to get their 15 minutes of fame.
Hmm.
There was no truth to it. That there was a potential witness the night of the murder in which a neighbor thought they heard shouting of multiple people around the time Martha would have been murdered. Um, I think at one point they even said that they thought that they were in their garage, and they went out there and, like whoever it was scooted, but they definitely thought it was more than one person.
Oh,
It
okay.
wasn't just a single voice,
Right.
but it was multiple males. And the Skakel and the Moxley's property they weren't like side by side neighbors. They were like across the street neighbors,
Okay.
just so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, like how I move my hands,
Yeah.
like as if everybody else can see it. Totally. Everybody gets it now. Uh, As a result of all of this information, on October 23rd, 2013, the case was overturned and a new trial was ordered. On November 11th, Michael was released on $1 million bail. In 2016, the state Supreme Court reinstated the convictions, but then again in 2018, the decision was reversed,
Oh my God.
vacated by the Connecticut Supreme Court ordering a new trial. On January 7th, 2019, the most recent decision was upheld, so that reversal was upheld. In 2020, the chief of state's attorney declined to prosecute Michael Skakel again.
Oh my gosh.
I know that's a lot.
It is a lot.
That's so much back and forth, too. And you're like, I feel like on both sides it's hard, right? So if Michael didn't do it, here's this man just being thrown
Right.
back and forth in this situation, like, am I guilty? Am I not guilty? Am I going to prison? He was in prison for a
Right.
while. And then the Moxleys definitely want their justice for their daughter, which
R-
is fair. And based on all the reports I could find and from the mother herself, she definitely believes it's Michael. And I don't
Okay.
know if it's just because, it was presented in trial that way and you start to hear all this stuff and then he gets convicted and you're like, yep, in
Yeah.
my head, he's 100% guilty. Um, so that's got to be difficult. Then now the sentence gets
Oh,
vacated
you
and
just constantly be getting like your trauma torn back open every
yeah,
every few years.
yeah, every time this happens.
Also, if he is guilty, not to say that it's like he is fortunate because he gets to live a lot of his life outside
Outside.
of bars, but still the reality of living in that court system and like never knowing when the next person who knocks on your door might be someone saying, actually, we changed our mind again,
Yeah,
would be a little bit of a hell. Like it's
yeah,
a punishment in itself if he is guilty. Like
yeah.
he's never going to be able to live a life until you reach the point where they say this is no longer something we can
Hmm.
bring to court.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, this case, when you look at it, because there's a couple documentaries on it and a lot of news articles because of the Kennedy relation to
Right.
everything, because everything starts with Kennedy's nephew, you know.
Of course.
So, but if that's really all the information they have, I am surprised that they got a prosecution out of this and a conviction. Because I'm like, he seems like one of the least likely to be able to do it, considering he was with two of his other brothers at the time that the murder was supposed to have happened in a car, not in the neighborhood.
Right. And, they say that, like, I mean, now I'm believing the evidence that I don't even know how it exists, but the hairs, but like,
Yeah,
how many times, and it's not a lot, I can count on one hand, but like, I have ridden in the trunk of my friend's car before. Like, I would imagine in a gated community, they weren't checking the trunks of cars as people were driving in. These potentially teenage boys were like, thought that was hilarious that they were
yeah,
hiding in the trunk of the car. And then they show up to this house party like, surprise. And
yeah,
there's now these two individuals who are not accounted for on their guest log. Like,
yeah. And
so,
I don't even know if they like officially logged anybody in or they just kind of, checked people out before they came in. Um, But also, this is like Halloween time. I bet you it's, October 30th. I bet you there was a ton of parties in the
oh,
area.
for sure.
You're telling me that you remember every single kid that rolled through. If there was a car and it's jam packed with like 10 kids or whatever, and you're just like, just go through. Like, I know where
Yeah,
you're going, just go through. You're not going to keep accountability of every single name there. So who's to say that they didn't get into that area?
right.
And how big are these gates and walls? Like, can they just hop it? Is it like a 4 foot fence? And they're like, oh, let's just go over without going through the guard check.
Right.
You
And
know?
there's not cameras, there's
Yeah.
not like at that point there's
Especially
no
them. Yeah.
CCTV. Yeah.
And so I think it's just hard without knowing all of the finer details to even be able to try and figure out what happened. And where did this blanket come from? Where
Right.
did it come from? There's nothing that I have ever found that tells us where the stupid blanket came from because she's covered.
Right.
Okay. Where did that? So we investigated the the golf club we found, but where did the blanket come from? Was it also from the Skakel's house? Because that feels a little more suspicious. Did it come from somewhere else? Do we even know? Is it her own blanket? Like,
Yeah.
and so there's all these little pieces that obviously we don't know without having the police reports and being able to find those fine details. Even then, I'm sure we might be a little lost, but there's all the little pieces that we don't know. And the neighborhood looks a lot different. So even they had like a reporter that went through the neighborhood, and the Moxley home's not there anymore. It's different, but you look at the community and if it's the same kind of like gated that it was like now that it is then, literally it looks like you can step over a little brick wall.
Right. I
And
mean,
so I'm like, how how gated is this
right.
gated? You know what I mean? And so that just there's a lot of plot holes to this, and to say that Michael did it 100%, I don't think you can, especially I'm telling you that timeline's pretty tight with being with his brothers, and his two older brothers are never like the Rushton Jr. and the other one are never really brought into it as
Yeah.
even viable suspects. I'm like, were they just discounted? Like, they also live in the home. You're already looking at two of the other boys, but nobody ever mentions the other two. And I'm like, why?
And let's not forget Ken.
Yes, and Ken. And Ken is a suspect. Like, he was always a suspect. I mean, Martha's brother thinks that he didn't do it, but he could have just been a good liar. We don't know.
Right.
We have no idea. There are so many
There's
variables.
there's so many independent, like,
Yeah.
different bodies that are involved in these neighborhoods, which actually really complicates things like this when
Hmm.
they're being investigated, is like there's so many additional outside people who are involved in homes that require staff, like
Hmm.
that it turns into a game of Clue.
Yeah. And again, we don't have all the investigation reports. So who else did they talk to? What else happened? This seems like, you know how you see like TV series and they'll like play an episode and then rewind it and start it again from a different point of view. Like, we need all their point of views of what happened,
Right.
because the timeline's a very small window of when they think this happened, but all of these kids are like converging on this house near the same time. Like, Ken goes out at and I'm like, that is a lot of movement right across the street for them not to see anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, but it's just, again, there's no CCTV. I'm sure they don't have ring cameras at that time, so they're not picking up anything. So it's just, it's a lot. There's a lot of missing stuff that I'm just surprised that they got the conviction to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm
And
surprised they even went after him.
yeah, there's too many, like, even just from my knowledge of golfers
Oh no.
too. But, like, I mean, they clearly weren't these boys' clubs, but,
Hmm.
like, it just feels off to me that the club would be broken into 3 pieces if it was your own club.
Yeah.
Like, there's something about that, like, I know my partner, he would never break his club regardless of what he did with it. Like, there's just something about it. It's like an added part of your body that you wouldn't just go break.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were avid golfers, but I would assume they are, given the location they live in.
Yeah. So in January 2024, Michael filed a lawsuit against Greenwich, uh, in which it alleges that the police department and investigators, quote, conspired, assisted, and or otherwise acted jointly and or in concert with one or more of each of the aforementioned others to violate Mr. Skakel's rights. They did so by withholding witness statements that proved there were other men in the neighborhood the night of the murder. In addition, authorities knew that there were other more likely suspects and that was no probable cause to arrest and or maintain a prosecution against the plaintiff, Skakel, but continued to do so intentionally and maliciously in order to convict a Kennedy cousin, end quote.
Wow, that makes me even like, I don't know, that adds a layer of intrigue to me that he's like what I was saying.
Countersuing.
Yeah, it's like you've been distressed over this your whole life, like you've been pursued about it, and like it feels like now it's finally in the back trails of your history. Like Supreme Court was it the Supreme Court ruling that finally said like we're upholding this, or
The state supreme,
this
yeah.
the state supreme. So like it's highly unlikely that you're gonna get brought back into any form of trial for this.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he's now pursuing more legal action. Just seems like you would only do that if you were innocent
I feel like you'd only do that if you're rich.
or rich,
The
maybe.
rest of us don't have the money to put
Yeah,
aside to, because it just feels like a, see, I'm out. And so now, of course, I'm going to countersue because,
yeah, and also you maybe only do that if you're from a family of lawyers too,
yeah,
where it's like this is our job.
yeah,
This is what we do.
yeah. I don't think the average person could afford to do that, innocent or not. But I think he has the privilege of being able to do
Yeah,
it based on his money that the family has.
yeah. And if he was even like at any point, one of his family members was like, "You need to countersue," like
Hmm.
him probably being like, "No, I'm good," would have been suspicious to
Yeah.
his family.
Yeah. They were like, no,
Like,
we're doing
what's
it.
wrong with you? Like, we're going after this.
Hmm. Martha's family has maintained their belief that Michael Skakel killed their daughter. After news in 2018 that Michael Skakel's conviction was overturned, her mother, Dorothy Moxley, told New York Times, quote, "There's no doubt in my mind that he did it," end quote.
Mhm.
Her mother said of her that she was an easy child, that she loved people and people loved her, and she was a very wonderful person.
Hmm.
As of this time, Martha Moxley's murder remains unsolved.
Man, I don't believe Michael did it either.
See, I know everybody, so all of the, if you look at like news reports and like document, they all kind of lean towards the Michael is guilty. And I'm like, I oddly enough lean kind of the other way
What
where,
does Reddit say about
oh my God, I do not read Reddit. I have no idea. I have no idea. I would never know.
it?
Um, I don't subscribe to Reddit threads.
I know.
But I just thought it was so weird because I'm like, oh, if everybody thinks he did it, like that's kind of what got me diving into this. I'm like, if everybody, and then I started reading, I was like, oh, everybody's just going off of the original
Right.
thought that he did it because he got arrested and convicted, but then it got vacated. And if you look back, like, where's the evidence?
Yeah.
Like, again, there's a
It's
burden.
proximity.
Yeah, there's a burden of proof, and I don't think that they actually had it. I think that there was so much notoriety that everything got caught up in kind of like, oh, yeah, he definitely told me because now you're getting your 15 minutes of fame.
Right.
So you just want to be part of the story. Of course, I'm going to add a narrative if I'm around that area because I get my 15 minutes of
Right.
fame, whether I say he did it or he didn't do
Yeah.
it, and it's just going to add controversy.
Right. And
Like,
people aren't going to want to hear the story of like, oh, he's claiming he's innocent.
yeah,
Like, so you
and
have
he's
to
definitely
say,
innocent. You know what
right.
yeah,
You have
so
to say, yeah, he admitted to it to me. And
yeah,
then there you go. You get to have your face all over the paper.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's funny that I just am like, "Oh, I don't actually like there's a lot out there that think that he did it." And I'm like, "I don't there's more suspects, I think."
Someone knows.
Oh, 100% somebody knows, and I think somebody still living knows.
Yeah, I do too. I think someone knows. I think someone's parents probably know.
Mhm.
Um, inclined to believe that parents in communities like this are willing to help kids get away with certain things
That's
that
horrible.
I know it's awful, but it's happened.
Maybe not this. I know.
Maybe not this, potentially not this, but I definitely know, like, I'm confident that someone genuinely is still alive and knows what happened to Martha.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get an answer in the future. That would be kind of nice,
Yeah.
I hate unsolved, but I had to tell this story because it
Oh,
was just kind of crazy
yeah.
the way that it went. But to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.